My name's Melanie and I'm on the ETAC Management Committee. I'm just here to introduce my lovely colleague Dan from Corinda State High. Dan's a senior teacher that's been working at Corinda for a while now. He's one of our most amazing teachers, particularly with senior English and literature. At Corinda, we've been implementing the Reading to Learn program starting to this year, and I've just been talking about how it's something that's a really amazing program. Who's heard of Reading to Learn? A lot of you. But we find as senior secondary teachers that you do have to adapt it a little bit to suit your context and the fact that we only have an hour for a lesson and that. So Dan's here today to tell us about how he's been using it in his classroom. And yeah, it'll be exciting. Let's go.
Thank you, Melanie. Can I just, I wasn't looking, who's done some Reading to Learn? Who's aware? So a smattering of us. Okay. What we're after today, I'll summarise briefly Reading to Learn. I've got no affiliation with David Rose or his program. I've done some of the training. I've liked some of it. I've played with some of it. But this is not obviously his training. So if you see me skip things or forget them, please just turn a blind eye. I'm going to model some of the activities I do in my class, in my senior classes that we've been working on, and that'll be the guts of this workshop. It's very practical, very hands-on. We'll see if we can play around with some of that. And then obviously, rather than trying to sell you Reading to Learn, a bit of a reflection on how it's worked in my classroom or how it hasn't worked or things we need to change. And hopefully we'll find some beauty. Now we're here for the love of the language, we're English teachers. If we can't find some beauty, then we probably shouldn't be at work on a Saturday. I don't think. Your name tags are up, that's lovely, thank you, I can read most of them. Oh, what's your name, miss? You haven't got one there. My name's Dan Fallon. I've been teaching at Corinda for 12 years now, so I won't say I'm an expert, but I'm not a novice anymore at least with senior English. For Reading to Learn, I am a novice. I've only half done the training. It's 8 days this year. I think I've done 4. Have we done 4, Karen? Yep. So it's incomplete. I'm by no means an expert. This is more about just trying to join the two together and a little bit of an overview of the experience, if you like, of the journey. There's one for Karen. Reading to Learn. It's not rocket science. I think that's what we learned in the first few sessions of it, that a lot of it is things that we do already. It's maybe a good refresher at times, or some of it seems very obvious, or some of it's so clever that it's obvious in the end, but it's not rocket science. It's about scaffolded support, helping the kids to read and finding some steps to do that. And by making them better readers, also making them better writers with some really hands-on scaffolding there. And it does that, I guess the primary principle of it is about reducing the cognitive load. That's my favourite phrase this year. I've heard it from a few different sources, that a working memory's only got a certain amount of space in it, and if we're poor readers, well, we're not poor readers, but if our students are poor readers, then they struggle so much with what this word means or what this story's about or which character is talking now that they can't possibly keep track of everything at once. So Reading to Learn tries to reduce a lot of that cognitive load so that students can focus on this one sentence at a time and actually see what you're trying to show them, what I'm going to show today. They can focus on some of the beauty rather than just trying to figure out what the hell it means. They can figure out why it means that or the nuances of how it means that. Reducing cognitive load on the working memory, a lot of repeat reading doing that, and building some neural connections. So it's not rocket science, but it is brain surgery, or at least brain science. A lot in common as well. I've been doing the Quick Smart Literacy Intervention training this year as well, based out of UNE. All the same science, so it's nice that they're backed up, that they're complementary, different programs entirely, and also supported by Mem Fox. And if you haven't read her Reading Magic, do yourselves a favour. As either a teacher of reading to students, or for me, I just reread it recently, father of a very young child. There's some really nice stuff in there. It's boiled down for the layperson. It's not loaded with jargon at all. It's designed for mums and dads reading to their kids, but she's filtered all of the science as well. And again, it's consistent with what UNE is doing with Quick Smart and what David Rose is doing with Reading to Learn. So I believe it works. There's evidence to say that it works. The evaluations, the growth rates are much better. 3 times the standard growth at. But we're not going to deal with stats today. I've got no numbers to throw at you. It's all about gut feeling and the beauty of what students are producing. But apparently it does work. Okay, let's jump on to the first model for comprehension and note making. So this is the first thing. Reading to Learn will very useful for any level of students, any level of grade, so about comprehending. Really useful for a textbook or something like that, factual information you want the students to know. Also very good though for studying a novel. So this is from my Year 12 English class. The first step we should do is preview the whole text, which the text is The Quiet American. Who's read it? Where are you? Good people, clever people. Seen the movie? Alright, not bad. Graham Greene's The Quiet American. It's an awesome novel. I highly recommend it. Here's a little snapshot from the film, which is quite faithful, which will help introduce everything you need to know.
File where you meet everybody at Hotel Continental. I'm there every morning at 11. I'm English. I have habits. I drink tea. I'm a reporter, so I listen. I have a lover. I like to watch her arrive with her friends at the mill park. And there was Baldwin Pyle, the face with no history, no problems, the face we all had once.
I'm Alden Pyle.
I'm Thomas Fowler.
And there we go. We have our three main characters introduced. Thomas Fowler, the British reporter, reporting on the French war in Vietnam in the 1950s. The younger American guy reading that book, The Dangers to Democracy. I had to stop myself there, not The Dangers of Democracy. He's actually a covert agent for the CIA. He's there to try and stop the rise of communist Vietnam without actually helping colonialist French forces. And the third party, the woman Phung, the Vietnamese local, who at the start of the story is Fowler's lover. In the middle of the story has moved in with the American Pyle and is going to marry him. By the end of the story, which is back where the start is, she's back with Fowler because Pyle is dead. Alright, so it's all superficially about politics, if you like, or maybe superficially about the love triangle, but much more it's about the politics of the situation and how these two men buy into or don't buy into the conflict in Vietnam. Reading to Learn says we should do something like that before we attack a story. And obviously any sort of English teacher will do that with their kids. You're not just going to throw this straight in to a novel, particularly not a literary text like this one. It doesn't have much of an orientation. It starts, it hits the ground running. And the first extract you have there is the very first page from the novel. So there's a lot to try and pick up without having any clues. So obviously we give them some preview. We preview the specific scene we're going to read now. Maybe we've read it before as well, or you've read it for homework, now we're going to study it in class. This is the opening scene. Alright, I didn't give myself any notes. So the opening scene is Fowler, he's the narrator, it's first person narrator, telling us that he's waiting for Pyle. That they've made some sort of dinner engagement and Pyle hasn't turned up. Pyle's a very meticulous man, very polite, so it's unusual he hasn't turned up, so we build some tension already. What this first page also does is set the scene for us nicely that it's set in Vietnam. This scene is in Saigon, and that we're 60 years ago, in the early 1950s. There's sorts of things we need to know about this scene. Where the change might come from what we do as, or what I used to do, or still do, as a basic English teacher, an unreading to learn English teacher, is that might have been it. We've done the preview, now we'll do some reading. And what I've done in the past, up until this year, is given them this section. We'll have read through it once, at least together. But now go through, and I want you, if you're my kiddies, I want you to go through and just identify the words or the phrases that help identify the setting. Fairly standard stuff. Do some reading, do some comprehension based on it. Really trying to get you to focus on the individual words or phrases. The change for Reading to Learn says don't just leave them there, hold their hand a little bit further. If it's important that they get to know this information, then make sure they know this information. It's all about guaranteed success. So, Reading to Learn says, not just preview the whole story and preview the scene, but preview each sentence. As we read it, we will preview each sentence. And then rather than telling you to find things, and so getting that working memory all clogged up, oh my God, what does it mean, where is it, and then melting down, I will tell you where it is. Or I'll give you enough clues that you can find it and feel like you found it yourself. Reducing that cognitive load, give you the meaning. If it's important that you know what this sentence means, then I will tell you what it means. I won't leave you to flounder for it, or I won't leave just the most competent, the strongest readers to survive. give you the directions, and then students to identify.
Can I just, quick question?
Yes.
What we're just noting here was the phrase in French in there. A lot of novels that we teach actually have the random foreign language.
Yeah.
You have the kids who are saying, I would just Googled it. Then you have the kids who skip it, and that doesn't matter. And often that's quite significant. In this instance, significant in terms of the setting, the relationship to characters,
Yes.
and so on. I'm just saying, in terms of this first step in the activity, what do you do with your students? Do you address the fact that probably frequently?
Well, I told them what I do, yeah.
Yeah.
So I mostly skipped it.
Yeah.
You know, I don't speak enough French. I know what fenêtre is, probably window.
J'ai vu sur la fenêtre. I saw you alone at the window.
Saw you alone at the window. Okay, thank you. My next thing is to ask if anyone knows it. Quite often I might have a senior French student, or you know, they can ask the French teacher then. And the joy is, it's like any sort of vocab though, any new vocab in English, you don't actually need to know a single word of French. If you read what comes before and what comes after, you make sense of it in the context. So all I want to know is, you know, oh, what is that? It's French. And that's one of the clues. Well, where do they speak French when they're not French? What Reading to Learn does a lot of is highlighting. So you're going to need to use these highlighters, or you can make notes in your own book, because for this activity it's one that I've done slightly differently to the Reading to Learn methodology, where they would normally just highlight. I can't get my kids to do that in the book, and I've got a limited photocopying budget, so I've got, and these are year 12s I'm after as well, so they're not you know, little kiddies. They don't need their hands held a lot in terms of the practicalities. They can manage writing a list of words in their books. So do whichever you please. Either write the words down or highlight them on your extract. And then we do the elaboration, much like Julie asked there. You know, there's something in the text, talks about it, and we can elaborate on that, and we can use other expert knowledge in the room from Libby, who can tell us what it means.
With that little sentence as well, there's other important information there, because there's two ways to say you in French. One way for someone you know well, and another way for someone you don't know well. It uses the personal one.
Excellent.
So it is important, because you wouldn't say that to someone
Yeah.
you don't know well.
Yep. Great. And that's just demonstrated beautifully that it's this elaboration phase where you get really your differentiation. Right, in the first bit, where previously some of my struggling students might have fallen off, I'll make sure they all get the notes and all get the right information, but then the ones with more knowledge or more depth, we can elaborate, we can extend and push ourselves that little bit more. Okay, so we have the first clause, the very first beginning of the novel there, tells us where Fowler is waiting. Tells us that he's waiting for Pyle. So after dinner, I sat and waited for Pyle in my room over the Rue Catinat. Now at a lower level, we might look for any sorts of clues, or if we're looking for a really specific setting, I might ask you to say, whereabouts is he? Or which part of his house was he in? But I'm not interested in that. I'm talking the bigger scale setting in Vietnam in the 1950s. So Gary, towards the end of that clause there, that gives us an unfamiliar term. Maybe the foreign word. The Rue. Yeah, and the Rue Catinat. It's got that capital A. Can we highlight, please? Or jot down Rue Catinat. There we go, the preview, the reading, the direction for what you should be highlighting or making a note of in your list, and then we can elaborate and we can talk about what that might mean. Well, the fact that it's capitalised, proper noun, what do you think, Alison?
I'd say it's a name.
You'd say it's a name. What of? What sort of thing is it? Person's name?
Well, I know bugger all French, but I think I know that Rue means street.
There you go, it does mean street. So drawing on your knowledge of the world as well, it does mean street, and it's capitalised like a street name would be. So there's our first clue about the setting, and that the name is what's a French name for street. And we could build more elaboration into there. I might ask Donna where she thinks we are then. If she wasn't paying attention to the earlier, preview. Where are we going to be that has a street name in French?
Maybe Vietnam.
Maybe Vietnam, yeah. Thank you for not saying Paris. You were awake. And we're going to build up the clues as we go. So the next bit tells us how Fowler reacts to Pyle not being there. He had said, I'll be with you at the latest by 10, and when midnight struck, I couldn't stay quiet any longer and went down into the street. Don't care about that, doesn't tell us much about the setting. There's all sorts of things we could attack it for, but I'm focused purely on setting here with this extract. The next sentence, or the next clause there, gives us a bit of a description of some of the locals. A lot of old women in black trousers squatted on the landing. Chris, can you tell me about the women? Something distinctive about them?
They're dressed in black.
Yeah, black what?
Trousers.
Black trousers. So let's highlight black trousers, please. And see if that conjures any images for us. just the fact that we could elaborate, talk different trousers versus more feminine garments, the fact that they're black, anything like that. At Corinda, we've got a very large Vietnamese population as well, so we're tapping into a lot of their cultural knowledge, a lot of their family histories. Right, and the next clause gives us a bit more of a clue as well, and maybe confirms some of the things we've heard before about what part of the world we're in. It was February, and I suppose too hot for them in bed. So I might ask Kim, what time of the year are we in? It's a nice easy one. It would be a nice easy one if you had a voice. February, thank you. So let's highlight February. And Lauren, towards the end of that clause there, we find out something about February.
That it's hot.
Yeah, how hot?
Too hot.
Too hot. All right, well, that sounds quite reasonable, doesn't it? I've had Februarys that have been too hot. Let's highlight too hot. And then in the elaboration, we can start talking about what that says to us. That, okay, this is not going to be February in Paris. We're talking either Southern Hemisphere or the tropics at the very least here. The next sentence, again, tells us a bit more clues, a bit more of a clue geographically. One trishaw driver pedalled slowly towards the riverfront, and I could see lamps burning where they had disembarked for new American planes. So we talk about a form of transport there. Linda, how do they get around? It's a trishaw. Do you know what a trishaw is?
A vehicle with 3 wheels.
There we go. And if we didn't know, we could start to unpack it based on, the word structure, the tri for sure. We can rely on some of their cultural knowledge, or I can just tell you if we don't know anything, depending on what the students need. But we all have now trishaw highlighted here as well. And we get our first clue about the era here, about how things are illuminated. Rachel, how do we illuminate things here?
With lamps burning.
With lamps burning, yeah. Are these electric lamps? Gas lamps? I'm not sure. But just that, it's that older-fashioned term, isn't it? He doesn't say street lights. He certainly doesn't call them the electric lights or the fluoro lights or anything like that. So maybe we've got a clue that we're back in time a little bit. And we get a bit of our context in terms of the politics and the geopolitical situation. What else is there? Down at the end of the street, Natalie? Down at the end of the street, and if my clues haven't been precise enough, down at the end of the sentence. The American planes. Why American planes then? We're not in America. So again, the elaboration can draw out a lot more. Depending on how strong or how weak your class is, your clues can be a lot more directed in terms of the geography of the sentence. It's right there after the comma, or it's the third word. Find it, or it's the noun group with 3 words in it. Can you pick that out for me? Or with a stronger group, I can ask more general questions, and obviously you're all good comprehenders and can latch onto these things. Anyway, so we could go on highlighting through them. I won't go through the whole passage with you, but we get to the white silk trousers, the long flowered robe. We get to her name, Fung. We get to her speaking in French to him. And he suggests that she shouldn't stay on the street to wait any further because the police might pick you up. And so that at the end of our orientation really gives us enough clues that we can talk about geographically where we are. We can talk about historically when we are or when we might be. We've got lamps burning, but we've also got planes. We're speaking French. The G Fung doesn't sound like a French name. And we've got this sort of tension that it's not safe to be out on the streets. And that is Welcome to Saigon in the 1950s. After that, we could just keep reading now. If you've got a sense of the setting, that might be enough. Or you've highlighted some things, you can come back to it. Or I could extend that into not a specifically reading to learn activity. We've done the reading, we've done some learning. Now you can demonstrate that for me. I want you to write me a paragraph, please, Rachel, about the setting and all the clues you found about it. How can you tell this is Vietnam in the 1950s? Now you've got the 3 different bits of evidence that we could put in there. Or we could do any other sort of comprehension or extension activity. Or as the last bit, we could just move on. As you'll notice already, we only got through 1 paragraph. It's quite slow. The lessons tend to be quick. It's all go, 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 and it's a lot of energy in teaching these lessons, I've got to say. But the amount of content you get through is quite small. So you can't overload them, I don't think, or you can't expect to do a little bit of reading and then the comprehension activities or answering the questions that I would normally have done. Something's got to give. So a little bit of reflection. As I said, some of you have been highlighting. Reading to Learn is all about highlighting, really. And in the note-making phase of it, we take the highlighting and then we get a student volunteer up here to scribe on the board a list of those notes that other kids in the class read out as well, so that we go from the highlighting to the list of notes. For my Year 12 class, I've just skipped that simply as a logistical matter of the time involved. But I guess if it was a different class, a different subject area, I mean, you know, maybe like a science text or a history text where there's a lot of content vocab that they were learning, it might be worth the repetition factor. Yes, so it's quicker, saves on photocopying. What I'm not sure about, what I'd like to think a bit more on and talk to David Rose next time I see him, is by getting you to write a list of words rather than highlight, that's maybe a bit slower. And it maybe does interrupt the reading and comprehending process a bit more, I'm not sure. But then, you know, I've got to find somewhere the point of diminishing returns as to how much I invest in it. Even writing the list, even if that's not quite as good as highlighting then writing, it will be better than what I was doing before, hopefully, in terms of comprehension, particularly for my struggling readers. The target really is, I think, for those low and medium strength readers, to make sure that they understand, you know, our good readers are going to skim through this and pick up a lot of it just organically by osmosis. But I've got to say it's working really well with my high achievers in the class as well, and they don't seem to be disengaged with it, and there's enough opportunity to elaborate and challenge them and differentiate there. But particularly my high achievers, as I said, we've got a large Vietnamese population. Our academic kids, but who don't necessarily have a good grasp of idiom or that background in the language and the culture, they really appreciate this and picking up some of those more subtle clues. And as we talked about the differentiation. The initial reaction, you guys did really well with it. The initial reaction from my class when I said, hey, Julie, can you tell me the clue there in the first sentence where he is? It's like, oh, it can't possibly just be Rukat. No, it must be something else. There's a lot of overthinking. They were trying to do this higher order stuff, and I said, no, just slow down. It's at the end, it's the 2 words before the semicolon, please. It only took us a few minutes to get over that, but yeah, a few of the kids really did think there must be more to it than this. But there's not, and that's very deliberate to make sure that you get that success straight away. You don't have to know anything, you just follow the instructions. I'm telling you there's a word there that says, you know, maybe the street name in French. Can you tell me what that? Oh, is it then? Yes. Move on. But they are quite enthusiastic about it. That success is addictive, and actually one of my most positive contributors now is probably one of the weakest kids in the class. But when we do one of these activities, she knows that if she just follows the steps, she will get all that positive praise. You know, not overwhelming praise, but just correct, yep, good, move on, go. Rather than her sitting there scratching her head thinking, what's he on about again this time? I just don't know. And this book, So it's really quite good for that, I think. But you do need the names because, and Bonnie, she is one of my lower performing students. You need to know your kids' names, I think, and be able to direct them. That's why I want this, because she's so enthusiastic now that she's one of those kids who's going to dominate the activity. So it's nice to deliberately, or necessary to deliberately move around the classroom, or even sometimes I just do it based on everyone gets the next one, so it's not just one student dominating. Right, only 2 minutes behind. We are on to Model 2. Having read the novel, one of the tasks we do with our Year 12s is get them to choose a film that's got a matching theme, and then they do a multimedia presentation. Effectively, they have to write the essay first, though, comparing the two and the representation of the theme. So for Quiet American, we look at, you know, love and colonialism and idealism and war. Maybe it is that simple, I think. So the 2 texts I've flipped this around a little bit because it's such a good film version of The Quiet American. We do a bit of film study stuff on that to model how they can unpack a film as well and find the evidence. And then I've used a different written text, which is Her Father's Daughter, which is Alice Pung's memoir, her second memoir, all about her father's time in Cambodia. Also well worth a read. So previously, I would have given them an exemplar. Here's a model, an example of the task, something that I've done. Show you how the task is done, kids. And they can make annotations on that as well, and we'll highlight the structure to them and highlight some of the key vocab. And there's the text. There's my introduction. So what I would have done is gone through, and we can unpack the different ingredients I want them to show me in the introduction. This is very similar to what Reading to Learn will do in terms of a phase analysis, and it's nothing different to what I've been doing already. Breaking it into the different parts, and you can now see when you come to write your introduction, you should give me a title, a hook, identify the text, summarise them, give me the clear thesis, and outline what your argument's going to be about. So they know those ingredients are going to be there. But I've been doing that for every year that I've been teaching senior English, and the results are always quite mixed. What reading to learn will do is, again, well, that phase analysis won't change anything there, but the detailed read would be previewing each sentence. So rather than just saying this is what the structure is, previewing the sentence and maybe picking out the words that put that into practice. Again, directing students to highlight and elaborating on those structures and the vocabulary in there and what it means. And then we might go on and do a joint construction where with class input I could be writing up on the board, so we'll get a new title, we'll get a new hook, we'll get a new identification and summary and a new thesis. And then leaving that on the board, and with this sample the students then in the third time try and write their own following that same structure. The variation, particularly for year 12s, that I've done is a specific focus on just two types of vocabulary that I really wanted to target in this unit. So yes, I want them to get the structure, yes, I want them to write good sentences, but particularly I want them to be looking at evaluative language and connective language. So the words that help make the judgments, make it clear, because that's what they weren't giving me very clearly, certainly my weaker students, and the words that help the sentences hang together. So again, maybe nothing new about that, but in the practice of it, we read. So I've got the title, we can skip that. The first sentence is a very clear statement about ideas. Ideas are powerful. We'll get down the back there. Robin, where's the evaluative word in that first sentence, the one that judges ideas? They're powerful, so we're going to highlight that, please. We're going to highlight it in your first choice of colour. Or you could highlight one and the other, if you like. Second sentence here just elaborates on that first statement and gives us the secondary piece of judgment as well. Like all sources of power, they can be dangerous when in the wrong hands. Now look, you're a good year 12 class, we've practiced this before, so I'm not going to give you too many clues about it, but I'm just going to tell you there are now two evaluative words in that second sentence. Lauren, can you give me the first one, please?
Dangerous.
Dangerous. Whoop, yes. Sorry, I can't read my own notes. Dangerous. And the second one, please, Kathleen? Yeah, the wrong hands. So we're judging them. And I've already highlighted for you, obviously, the first, the connective that links to other ideas beyond this sentence. The third sentence there now introduces both our texts. That's its job, to identify the text. My father's daughter and the quiet American both detail the consequences of extreme political idealism. I have got some judgment in there, but really what I'm after now is just the connective. Kathy, what's the word that says they're similar? Both. It's fairly simple, isn't it? It's not rocket science, the language you're using even, but sometimes just drawing attention to it for the students and using that word similar, because that's the gist of their thesis. Is the film similar to the novel or is it different to the novel? And they need to be layering that language in all the way through their introduction and their text, not just in their thesis statement. The next sentence gives us a bit of a summary of the first text. The former, by Alice Pong, is a memoir about her father's travails under and eventual escape from the notorious Cambodian regime of Pol Pot and Khmer Rouge. No name tags here. How am I supposed to pick up? Kath, can you tell me please, there's a connective early in that sentence that links to the first text.
The former.
The former. And so we can elaborate on that if we needed to, you know, are we familiar with it, former, latter, the pairings that we work. And then we've got, again, a couple of judgment words. They're not so much adjectives now, but this first one is a good evocative choice. Natalie, that tells us about her father. How does it tell us that her father suffered? Travails, yeah. So trying to expand your vocab year 12 and get you to incorporate some good choices in your nouns and your verbs, not just in your adjectives. And there's another one later on that tells us who the villain of the piece is. Sinead, can you tell me?
Pol Pot.
Yeah, how do you know he's the villain? Where's the judgment?
The regime.
His regime?
Notorious.
Notorious regime, yeah. So it's that word notorious that we really want to highlight. And we would go on like that through the rest of that text, highlighting, as I said, for this specific task, just those two types of language, rather than content stuff, some of the process stuff of comparison. Now, as I said, giving the exemplar to the kids and breaking down the phases, or maybe we wouldn't have called them phases previously, but breaking down the components, the ingredients of the introduction is absolutely nothing new. What I suspect, though, is that having done the other detailed read and some of those activities before with the reading to learn, the students are more attuned to the process and they're more inclined to get something out of it. That having practiced it and made a habit of doing this highlighting and really concentrating in great detail on the individual sentences, I got better value out of this class than I did in previous years. So I'm going to talk to you about the first two there are pretty much in the same category. Two girls, both very disengaged at the start of year 12 until they failed the first piece. Then we had the tears and they realised they had to pull up their socks. So they were always going to improve their marks. I can't attribute any of that to reading to learn, but I think the level of explicit detail and direction in going through the introduction, and we did one body paragraph as well of an essay, both of those girls were able to actually produce good, competent mid-B standards of work, which is not obviously beyond them because they did it, but it was certainly beyond what they could do off the cuff or with only minimal effort. So they were working reasonably well by this stage of the year, by the end of term 2, but I think they needed this model to be able to not just pass, but then to actually do quite well. And it helped them, showed them that if they did want to work hard, all they have to do is colour by numbers, fill in the boxes, and they can demonstrate a really effective structure. And if we use some of these sorts of language, that's, the highlighting sometimes, don't use these words, but there's a prompt that you need to use some sort of evaluative language in there each time that maybe they wouldn't have been doing in the past, even when they thought they were trying hard. And the third one, Jono, he's an amazing sort of kid. He's undiagnosed, but he's on the spectrum, like all of us are, some more obviously than others. I can't remember whether he got a C+ or a B- on this one, but he misread the task. He actually compared the Quiet American Film with another film, and it's clearly on the task sheet, and I hammered it at the class, and we just can't do that. It's the novel we were studying. Don't be distracted by my template. But once he gets something in his mind, he just runs with it. But having utilised the structure so well, and he did some great evaluation, he still did and got a fairly good mark. He's only at best a mid-B performer anyway, so he still got somewhere near his best on a task that he could conceivably have failed by choosing the wrong text altogether. But his structure was superb, and he put in some great connectives to link his ideas, and he put in some really wonderful evaluative language that I don't think he would have done without that deliberate practice. Okay, so this is my attempt at the analogy now. There's a basic planning framework. I want you to go away and do a comparison. That's what we might do if we're feeling lazy or if we're not putting in any effort for our kids. We're probably not going to do that. We might do this and say, there is what I want you to produce. The beautiful, yes, there's the framework, but look, there's what it looks like. There it is. It's on the page. Go away and write one of them. Still not entirely helpful, so then, all right, we'll unpack it for you. Yeah, put some hair in, put an ambiguous smile, whatever. Give it some background. There we go. Now you're right to go. I think reading to learn takes us that one step further. It's maybe a bit clunky at times in the initial stages and maybe not as pretty overall, but we'll actually practice doing noses. We'll practice just doing mouths, just doing eyebrows, and then put them together. And you can get, a faithful representation of a potato head. So if we want good analysis or good noses, it takes that deliberate practice. What I really found was that something like this paragraph was just far too long, if that was my first step. That's good towards the end when they're looking at the generic structure and they need to put things together. But really what I want to practice on and do more of, and it's what I'm doing now with my Hamlet unit, is focusing just at the level of the sentence in terms of putting good evaluation in and good connection of ideas. I don't expect you to read that. It's the second soliloquy, just after the first player has done his speech about Hecuba, and Hamlet berates himself for not being able to match up to that sort of emotion when he's got enough motivation from his murdered father. And so rather than giving a whole paragraph of the text, one sentence. And that's going to be my thesis statement, or at least the point in my paragraph. In this soliloquy, Hamlet condemns himself as a coward by comparing his lack of vengeance to the first player's moving but counterfeit emotion. Right? I'd be happy if my Year 12s were writing me sentences like that in their thesis or in their body paragraphs, and I think they can. So what we started to do is break down the components within a sentence. So we have the context of it, the subject of the statement, the judgment, the evaluation, and then the elaboration of it. And again, because we've been doing the highlighting, they're getting used to highlighting things and replacing things, highlighting and replacing. And it does become a lot like colour by numbers, and it's starting to be effective. So I gave them a model and then kept the model. I changed the statement, the evaluation I wanted to make of Hamlet, that he displays his cunning, because he's going to design the play within the play to catch the conscience of the king. That shows him being very clever, very cunning. What we still need, though, is the context, the subject, and the elaboration. What I've done here, I've done the thinking. All right, because I'm not testing them at the moment. I'm trying to get them to write good sentences. I'm not really worried about their analysis of the play. I want them to be able to write about the analysis of the play. So I'll give you the idea. Here we go, reducing the cognitive load. And now what they do is fill in the blanks of the sentences. So we might do we would do this one together, or I did do this one together with my class, taking ideas from the class. Little options, write them up. Context is going to stay the same because it's from the same soliloquy. We'll change just the vocabulary of it though. So rather than what I had on the first one was in this soliloquy, I want a different way to say in this soliloquy. You know, maybe after the first player's speech, at the end of Act 2. Subject, again, needs to stay the same. She said she hates me, she's leaving. She got that out of the way early though. So Hamlet, we might look for synonyms, you know, the melancholy prince, whatever. The protagonist. Vocab only changes there. The evaluation changes, it's new content, and the elaboration will have to change content as well. Do some brainstorming, some sharing, write a good model sentence on the board, and then I'd give you the third one to go. Now, from that same speech, Hamlet also reveals his misogyny. Can't remember what the quote is. But he talks here, this is where he talks about, you know, the incestuous sheets, I think. So I'd have my class then do the third one solo. And if we get through that, they'd have 3 good statements that they could use. And there's 3 body paragraphs to analyse that one soliloquy, if we wanted to. The piano. This is David Rose's analogy of reading. And he says, if you're learning to play music, we wouldn't throw you at the keyboard and say, play me a symphony, play me a whole song. Write the song while you're playing it, off the top of your head, and play it and make it sound good. You know, obviously we don't do that. We give them the sheet music, or we teach them the notes, and they just have to practice putting them together in order. And this is what he's trying to do with Reading to Learn as well. We give them a lot of the ideas, we give them a lot of the content, and they're practicing how to find them in the sentences, and then in the writing, how to put them back together themselves. So we imagine a new field for the story. So this is over the page, where we do the same sort of thing that we've been doing in terms of detailed reading, in terms of looking at structure, but now we're trying to get towards 10 marks, we think. Now we're trying to get towards creative writing. And this is where I'm really interested in, and where we can try and get the kids producing some beauty is the goal. That's what it looked like on the board. You don't have to worry about what it actually says there. I've got a cleaner version coming up. But I put the text up from the novel. They can read it on their page as well, or we highlight on their handout, and then between us we write something on the board. And they've got that, and then they can try again. So we see Graham Greene's version, we see the entire class's version, and then they do an individual version. And so it's that repeated, deliberate practice. Give you a little bit of context. You're going to do some creative writing in just a moment. You've been too passive for far too long now. This is the scene, so try and pay attention to details. No, it's not the scene.
Morning, Larry. What is it today?
You know, some cockamamie assignment.
forget we're in a war zone, did you? Okay. And then we have our passage. It's actually a different bit from the film, but it's the best I could find because this scene is cut out in the movie. We have those 4 or 5 lines that we can read through now. And at that moment, the fountain exploded over the pavement. A bit of decorative coping struck a window and the glass fell like the water in a bright shower. Nobody was hurt. We shook the water and glass from our clothes. A bicycle wheel hummed like a top in the road, staggered and collapsed. It must be just 11, Mr. Heng said. Previously, what I've done is said, right, we're going to take some of these physical objects that we can see and we're going to try and replace them. Ready to Learn just makes that slightly more explicit in that we really just attack each sentence and we highlight the bits and we see how they go together, not just concepts in our head or planned ideas, but how Graham Greene makes them work on the page in sentences. So it's that process discourse from the last session. So in the end, I'm just going to rush through a little bit now. You know, we could again do the preview of each sentence and then get you to tell me which bits are there. But I want you to highlight a bit of decorative coping in one colour. There's the first theme. So I'm looking at 2 things here. I'm looking at things and actions, or participants and processes, verbs and nouns, whatever. Julie, what does the coping do? It struck. That's all I want. Just a nice strong verb there. And then she's already told us the next bit. What did it strike? It struck another thing. It struck a window. Melanie, what's the next thing?
The glass.
The glass. And what did it do, please, Pam?
Fell like
It fell. That's all I want for the moment. And then we get the nice simile, the comparison. What's the comparison there, Anna? How does the glass fall?
Like water, like the water in a bright shower.
Like the water in a bright shower. So we get that whole phrase. Boom. Nobody was hurt. In the next sentence, Donna, what did we do? Where's the next action?
We shook.
We shook. Good. And what did we shake? Please, Julie.
I'm not gonna yet.
That's right, we've got a couple of Julies there.
I'm lost now. Sorry.
We shook
The water in the glass.
the water in glass. And where did we shake them from? Our clothes. And look, if we're all on board, then you know we can speed things up here a little bit. But I guess that's one of the temptations, though, particularly when you're strapped for time, is just to start saying highlight this, whereas some of the real joy, the real strength, is to slow down and to make sure each individual gets their chance to have that success and builds on it, rather than just, oh, I'm down to the last 10 minutes and now just yell out to me and I'm going to get the 4 or 5 who are competent and confident, and we'll go on. So I'm going to tell myself to slow down again. I have another object. Rose, what's the next object?
Bicycle wheel.
It is, thank you. And what does it do, please, Kat? It hummed. Chris, how did it hum?
Like on the road.
Like a top in the road. And then we've got the next 2 verbs as well. What are they, please, Rhiannon?
Staggered and collapsed.
Staggered and collapsed. And then lastly, we get one of the characters reacts to it. What's his reaction, Karen? It must be just 11. So a little bit of dialogue there that I've highlighted in red from Mr. Heng. Okay, and now we change it over.
Could you have that said as an action?
Certainly could do, yes.
Because then you can talk about the different ways
Yes,
to use the same
yes,
said.
yes. And that would probably be a completely different lesson, I think. So, we're just going to change it. I want you to be imaginative, be creative. You were sitting there in the square with him. There's an explosion goes off near the fountain. Something moves. What moves? Suggestions, please.
Piece of chocolate cake on that lady's plate.
Piece of cake, great. Other options?
The car.
A car? The whole car? What part?
Door.
All right, car door, chocolate cake, one more.
Person.
Oh, nobody was hurt though.
Oh, no,
Nobody was hurt in this
yeah.
one. So no body parts. One more option.
Handbag.
A handbag. And the way I like to run this is just take a bit of a vote now. If we like, which one do we like best? Do you want the cake, the handbag, or a car door?
Chocolate cake.
The cake. Okay, Melanie's voted. I'm going to leave the first sentence exactly how it is. And at that moment, the fountain exploded over the pavement. Good. All we're going to do is try and describe this quite important action. It's the cake we've already looked at, so we might use the definite then. The bit of decorative coating. Slice of chocolate cake. So you've got room, hopefully, on your sheet. There's enough space there. Scribe above it. Or you could be writing in your books and write out the whole sentence. The slice of chocolate cake, what did it do?
Collapse.
It wobbled, it collapsed, or it
Crumbled.
Wobbled, collapsed, or crumbled? Oh, I'm going to say collapsed. I'm just going to use some. I'm just going to make the decision. Oh no, it can't collapse. We've got to take our transitive verb. That's rubbish. It's got to do something to something. So it can't collapse.
Splattered.
Splattered. Excellent. Splattered. Not a window. Let's change it. What did it splatter on?
On a lady's face.
On her face. What else could it splatter? The tablecloth. The dress. I'm going to go with the dress. Splattered. Her dress. I'm going to assume I've talked about her before if I've talked about the cake. And another thing. Something maybe related to the cake then.
The plate.
The plate. Can we be more specific? What sort of plate would you like?
China.
The china? Is it a saucer? Is it not a saucer? Is it a plate? Do we have? You know, we might talk about some of the content vocab we can have that I don't know. And the plate, what did it do? Shattered. Shattered like what? The plate shattered like
Mirror?
like glass, like a mirror. Oh, what sort of mirror? Sorry?
A silver mirror.
Like a mirror. Let's try and follow the same structure. Like a mirror in a bright shower, or a mirror. And here's the temptation as well in the joint rewrite, is for me to step in and to give you something. And I've really got to resist. Oh, like a mirror in a maze. Do they shatter? So maybe let's go with that idea of falling into or being struck. What strikes a mirror? What is it? Where do you normally see a mirror? In the bathroom. What might make it break?
Fist being thrust into it.
Alright, we could have that violent sort of action. What else? If it drops. So let's just go with that. Like a mirror falling to the ground. Nobody was hurt. We shook the water in glass. Well, we maybe get rid of we and we'll go with she. What's she going to do? She's not going to shake.
What?
Wiped the
Crumbs.
and icing from her dress. That'll do the job. And it goes on. We could do the whole lot. What do we want? What really works there, though, is leaving that on the board then and having the students have another go at it. And what you get is this sort of collaborative effort where you don't have to have that cognitive ability, that creative ability. You might be the person who throws cake at us, but you couldn't write this passage by yourself. But when someone else suggests, oh, it's the icing and it's the plate and it's the dress and it shatters like a mirror falling off the wall, oh, that's really good. I can use some of that. And hopefully, the group think is better than any individual thing. And it's really powerful when it all comes from the students. Ideally, it should even be a student up here scribing and me stepping back that little bit further and maybe just giving some direction about which choice we're going to make. But again, I tend to do all the writing myself, just not because of behavioural control, but just for that time and that pacing. The last bit here was dialogue. And dialogue's obviously really hard to write for the kids and make it sound natural. So what I did, the next step, was to take some dialogue from the novel and to do the same thing, just follow the same patterns. It's not on your handout, it was just the extension activity, if you like, to try and get dialogue making sense. There are the characters that we analysed from the original and the objects. Now let's change the scene, and their task is to do an intervention, so very similar to this job. Change the characters involved, change the objects that are in the scene, and what are they talking about. And then just replicate the dialogue, the patterns of the dialogue. So sit down, I said to Pyle, will you have some coffee? Becomes, please sit down, I said to Fowler, will you take a drink? My idea, my words, but Graham Greene's structure, Graham Greene's patterns. And the dialogue follows the same patterns. Very similar to what we just did in terms of prose and narration, but it's that little bit harder when it comes to the dialogue. So what I did was model this one for my kids first, and then we played with some alternative options. Maybe choose two different characters now and write a conversation following the same pattern. There's an offer, there's a refusal, there's some commentary, and there's this sort of lovely hanging statement at the end. You shouldn't trust anyone when there's a woman in the case. It's a throwback for me to the pre-laptop days when I did a lot more writing on the board and rubbing things off, and they were gone forever. And then when the laptops arrived, you've done something on the board and said, oh, that was good, I'm just going to type that up and use it again next year. But I think it's the process of the writing that's really useful for the kids as well. So it's reading to learn is a bit of a refresher, I guess, to go back to modelling and that collaborative effort of drafting. Things like using the objects, using the dialogue and the example, is nothing new there. As I said, it's that colour by numbers, that explicit joint construction, just taking it slightly that next step that I think is getting a little bit better. I always like to use, as I said, 3 options from the kids so that we can't just have one student dominating again. One really eager person, not necessarily the best person, but the eager person or the enthusiastic one, doing everything you ask from them. That's great, but I don't just want to write their example up on the board. So I'll always get at least 3, and that tends to encourage a few others to chime in. And they know they don't have to be great, they don't have to be the best. They could just throw one up there and they're like, I'm going to say cake, and you'll never take it. No, we're going to take cake. That works. Student responses, this next student, she's a low A, she's a really hard worker, so she's not the prime target for reading to learn. She wrote a beautiful example up for me, some beautiful creative writing, and she's not that good at the creative stuff. She's very good analytical. And so I did ask her, I said, Kim, how explain? And she said, sir, I went back to the novel and I looked at his sentences, just like he told us in class. And it works. It can work, and it works for our high flyers as well as the lower ones. This is what I had up before this original text, and then my red whiteboard marker over the top of it. Skip the first one even. Let's just read this. This is a joint construction that my Year 12 class did, word for word, where I made no decisions. I selected, but I didn't give them any creation. And this took us about 13 minutes, I think, to do in class to get this little passage. I sat in the trash hall for a minute to find my wallet. There was a snapshot of Fung, but no Fung. Fung reminds me of youth and the innocence of a skipping child in a playground, but a photograph is dead and frozen. It is almost as though the absent photographer is trying to open old wounds about the life I'd lost, for even her eyes are accusing. Now there's some of it, a little bit rough through the middle. On a redraft we'd edit some of that and make it flow a bit smoother, but we've got some sophisticated imagery, we've got some abstract ideas being linked in there, all from student input following the patterns of the novel because of this highlighting in the joint construction. So there's my evidence to you that it works, that we can produce good things as a class, and then the individuals go away and try and replicate that as well. The next step then, the real potential for beauty. Can we make the silk purse from the South here, from those kids who just aren't terribly engaged? Can they really be creative? This is what I'm trying at the moment. So doing Hamlet, Shakespeare gives us the template. Me and my job as a teacher, I'm trying to remove that cognitive load. I'm giving the replacement idea. And so we're focusing on the mechanics of writing, not that creative genius. Together we practice it, and then the students practice with their own. So to continue the piano analogy, we're now at the stage where the students are getting more confident. I do want them to compose their own music, but I'm going to tell them what I want the music to sound like. I want it to be a happy song or a sad song. or I want it to follow these sort of moods or story. Tell me that with your music. And then maybe they're ready to put it all together. So we did some warm-ups. Things like frailty, thy name is woman, highlighted, identified what parts they were doing, and replicated them. So thief, thy name is death, maybe. Or death, thou art a thief. Oh, there's too solid flesh. So we had some judgment. The flesh is too solid. We had 3 actions on it. We wanted to melt, thaw, resolve itself into a dew. Those triplicates that Shakespeare uses all the time. And the new thing that it's resolved into, that it's changed to. And we got out of that, oh, that this endless grey melancholy would spark, ignite, and burn itself into a rage. Following the same patterns, some reasonably simple ideas still, following Shakespeare's pattern. Then, here's the last example on your sheets. To be or not to be. We'll skip down a few lines of to be or not to be and we get to die, to sleep, no more. And what I wanted to do is see if the kids could replicate some extended imagery connecting death and sleep. Yep, death is just like asleep, isn't it? We took the possum to the vet and now he's asleep. That's right. That's all. It was quite a complex lesson. We laboured through all the little things here. We really read it in detail. We unpacked just this section of the soliloquy, didn't give the whole lot. Found out what all the bits are doing. And then left it a bit like that. And so I'm going to give you the option. I want you please to try and rewrite over those gaps. To die, to sleep? No. To cry, to bleed. I want you to connect bleeding with crying. Or you can choose one of the others if you like. Or if you're feeling particularly competent and you're already a creative thinker, come up with your own comparison. You have 2 minutes. It's easy! Come on. Unless you're 2 minutes up. Sorry. I could give you my example, but you don't need my example. You're all smart people, you can write your own. What I then got the students to do was choose their own character and think about another issue and connect some other ideas. So take it a little bit more abstract and replicate again. What I have seen is some real striving to try and make that good imagery. Just in my class, I haven't got any results yet. They'll come in a few weeks' time. General reflections on reading to learn. The smaller the text, the better. That one was far too huge. That was a whole lesson plowed through just trying to read about 12 lines of a soliloquy in that level of detail. So when the analytical ones where I did just one sentence, they're the ones where I've had best success. It is time intensive and can be quite tiring. Quite useful for QCS, short response. If you've got model answers, model paragraphs from the retrospective, can unpack them. Students Groves talked about that. You need to know your names, obviously, of your kids, just good practice anyway. You need to know your text pretty well, or else it's that much harder. And what you need to do is what you've just tried to do then in 2 minutes, is do the task in advance. Like everything, the more you've done of it, you know what students have to do, you'll get some of that creative stuff happening and you'll realise where the blocks are, or you'll be ready to start prompting. Because if I just say, I want you to compare 2 more things, and now I'm tired or hungry or whatever and I can't think of to cry, to bleed either, just like the kids on the spot. But I've written it myself the night before, gone through it all, oh yeah, that works, that doesn't work, that's a bit rough, but I'll show the kids and share it with them, and you'll be in position ready to prompt them. It's very easy to forget parts, particularly that sentence prompting. hopefully I've summarised it, Reading to Learn for you. You've seen some models. You've got some of my reflections on it, and we wanted to find some beauty. Well, I gave you the Mona Lisa, Leonard Cohen, Graham Greene, and Hamlet. If that's not enough for you, go have lunch.
So I just want to thank Dan. If you're anything like me, I always hate when he shares resources or when I watch him teach, because I thought my Hamlet unit was really, really good this term, and then I get this stuff and I'm like, oh, my poor kids suffered again.
Right,
So
really
thank
quick.
you.
Thank you all.